The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez pressed her face against the chain-link fence, watching the soldiers practice their shooting drills. Her small fingers gripped the metal links so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, but she didn't notice the discomfort. All her attention was focused on the precise movements of the men and women in camouflage uniforms as they raised their rifles, took aim, and fired at distant targets. Emma had been coming to this spot every morning for 3 weeks now, ever since her father, Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, had been stationed at Camp Pendleton. While other children her age were still sleeping or watching cartoons, she was here, studying every detail of military marksmanship training. She memorized the way the soldiers positioned their feet, how they controlled their breathing, and the steady way they squeezed the trigger.
"Emma! What are you doing out here again?"
Her father's voice carried a mixture of concern and mild irritation as he approached from behind. Miguel had been looking for his daughter for the past 20 minutes, checking all her usual hiding spots around their small base housing unit. She turned around, her dark eyes bright with excitement despite the early hour. "Papa, I was watching the soldiers practice shooting. Did you know that Sergeant Matthews can hit a target from 500 yards away? And Corporal Johnson told me yesterday that the best snipers can shoot accurately from over a mile away."
Miguel sighed and placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder.
Ever since Emma's mother had died in a car accident 2 years ago, the little girl had developed an intense fascination with military life. She seemed to find comfort in the structured environment of the base, but her latest obsession with marksmanship worried him. It wasn't exactly a typical hobby for an 8-year-old girl.
"Mija, you shouldn't be bothering the soldiers during their training.
They have important work to do," Miguel said softly, trying to steer her away from the fence.
"Why don't we go get some breakfast?
Mrs. Patterson from next door made those pancakes you like."
But Emma wasn't ready to leave.
She had been waiting for the perfect moment to ask her father something important, something she had been thinking about for weeks.
"Papa, do you think I could learn to shoot like them?" The question caught Miguel off guard.
He stopped walking and looked down at his daughter's earnest face.
"Emma, you're just a little girl.
Shooting is for soldiers, for adults who need to protect people." "But I want to protect people too," Emma said with the kind of simple conviction that only children possess.
"I want to be strong like you, and Mama always said I could be anything I wanted to be."
Miguel felt a familiar ache in his chest at the mention of his late wife. Maria had indeed always encouraged Emma's dreams, no matter how ambitious they seemed. But this was different. This was about weapons and warfare, topics that seemed too heavy for such small shoulders to bear.
As they walked back toward their housing unit, they passed the base's main administrative building.
Through the large windows, Emma could see important-looking officers in crisp uniforms moving through the hallways. One figure in particular caught her attention, a tall man with silver hair and numerous medals on his chest, walking with the kind of authority that commanded respect from everyone around him.
"Who is that man, Papa?" Emma asked, pointing through the window. Miguel followed her gaze and straightened his posture instinctively. "That's Colonel Harrison, Emma. He's the base commander. He's in charge of everything that happens here."
Emma studied the colonel's face as he moved through the building. There was something about his stern expression and the way other soldiers stepped aside for him that made her think he might be the kind of person who could help her achieve her dream. If anyone could give her permission to learn marksmanship, surely it would be the base commander himself. That afternoon, while her father was attending a mandatory briefing, Emma made a decision that would change the course of her life. She had been thinking about their morning conversation all day, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to take action. Her mother had always told her that if you wanted something badly enough, you had to be willing to fight for it. Emma made her way to the administrative building, her heart pounding with each step. The hallways were intimidating, filled with serious-faced adults in uniform who all seemed to have important places to be. She felt very small in this world of grown-ups and military protocol, but she forced herself to keep walking until she found what she was looking for, a door marked Base Commander in bold black letters. She stood outside the door for several minutes, building up the courage to knock. What would she say? How do you ask a colonel, the most important person on the entire base, to teach an 8-year-old girl how to shoot? The whole idea suddenly seemed ridiculous, and Emma almost turned around and went home. But then, she thought about her mother's words again, and about the promise she had made to herself while watching those soldiers train. She raised her small fist and knocked on the door 3 times. "Enter," came a gruff voice from inside.
Emma opened the door and stepped into Colonel Harrison's office.
The room was impressive and intimidating, with flags and commendations covering the walls, and a large desk that seemed to dwarf everything else in the space. Behind that desk sat the colonel himself, looking even more imposing up close than he had from a distance.
Colonel Harrison looked up from his paperwork with a frown.
He was clearly not expecting a small child to walk into his office unannounced. His gray eyes studied Emma with the kind of intensity that had intimidated seasoned soldiers, but the little girl stood her ground. "Young lady, I think you're lost," the colonel said in a tone that suggested she should leave immediately.
"The family recreation center is on the other side of the base." Emma took a deep breath and stepped closer to his desk. "Colonel Harrison, sir, my name is Emma Rodriguez."
"My father is Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, and I live here on the base with him."
The colonel's expression didn't soften. "And what exactly are you doing in my office, Miss Rodriguez? I'm quite sure you didn't have an appointment."
"No, sir, I don't have an appointment," Emma admitted, her voice wavering slightly but growing stronger as she continued.
"But I have something very important to ask you. I want to learn how to shoot.
I want to learn marksmanship like the soldiers do." For a moment, Colonel Harrison simply stared at her in disbelief. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, but it wasn't a kind smile.
It was the sort of smile adults give children when they've said something particularly naive or amusing.
"Is that so?" the colonel said, leaning back in his chair.
"And why, exactly, does an 8-year-old girl think she needs to learn military marksmanship?"
Emma had practiced this answer in her head dozens of times.
"Because I want to be the best at something important. I want to protect people and serve my country.
I've been watching the soldiers train every morning, and I know I could learn if someone would just give me a chance." Colonel Harrison's smile widened, and he let out a short laugh.
"Little girl, marksmanship isn't a game. It's not something you learn because it looks interesting or fun.
It's a serious military skill that requires years of training, physical strength, and mental discipline that children simply don't possess."
"But I'm disciplined," Emma protested. "I get up early every morning to watch the training.
I've memorized all the positions and breathing techniques.
I study everything about shooting that I can find in the base library." The colonel stood up from his desk and walked around to where Emma was standing.
Up close, he seemed even taller and more intimidating, but Emma refused to back down. She tilted her head back to meet his gaze, her small chin set with determination. "Listen to me very carefully," Colonel Harrison said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made Emma's cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Military marksmanship is not for little girls who think they want to play soldier. It's for trained professionals who have dedicated their lives to serving their country. What you need to do is go home, play with your dolls, and let the adults handle the serious business of national defense."
The words hit Emma like a physical blow.
She had expected him to be skeptical, maybe even to say no, but she hadn't expected him to be so dismissive, so cruel. The way he said little girls and play with your dolls made it clear that he didn't just think she was too young, he thought she was fundamentally incapable because of her gender. "I don't play with dolls," Emma said quietly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "And I'm not just some little girl who wants to play soldier.
I'm serious about this."
Colonel Harrison waved a dismissive hand.
"I'm sure you think you are.
But, in a few weeks, you'll forget all about this silly idea and move on to something more appropriate.
Perhaps you should consider joining the Girl Scouts instead. I hear they do some nice arts and crafts activities."
The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and Emma felt tears of frustration prick at the corners of her eyes. But she refused to cry in front of this man who had just crushed her dreams so casually. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. "You're wrong about me," she said with a quiet intensity that surprised them both. "Someday, I'm going to be the best marksman this base has ever seen. And, when that day comes, I hope you remember this conversation." Colonel Harrison chuckled again, clearly amused by what he perceived as childish defiance.
"Well, Miss Rodriguez, I look forward to seeing how that works out for you.
But, right now, I have real military business to attend to. I suggest you run along home before your father starts worrying about where you've gotten to." Emma stood there for another moment, memorizing every detail of the colonel's smug expression. She wanted to remember this moment, this feeling of being dismissed and underestimated. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of his office, closing the door quietly behind her. As she made her way back through the administrative building and across the base toward her home, Emma's mind was racing. The colonel's words had hurt more than she wanted to admit, but they had also ignited something fierce and determined inside her. He thought she was just a silly little girl with an impossible dream, but she would prove him wrong. That evening, when her father came home from his duties, he found Emma sitting at their small kitchen table with several library books spread out in front of her. The books were all about marksmanship, ballistics, and military training techniques, hardly typical reading material for a third grader.
"Emma, what's all this?" Miguel asked, hanging his uniform jacket on the back of a chair and sitting down across from his daughter.
"I'm studying, Papa," Emma said without looking up from a diagram showing proper rifle stance. "I went to see Colonel Harrison today to ask about marksmanship training."
Miguel's eyes widened. "You did what?"
"Emma, you can't just walk into the base commander's office and make requests like that."
"What did he say?"
Emma finally looked up from her books, and Miguel was struck by the determined expression on her face. It reminded him so much of her mother when Maria had made up her mind about something. "He said I was just a little girl who should play with dolls instead of thinking about serious things like shooting," Emma said matter-of-factly. "He said I would forget about this idea in a few weeks and move on to something more appropriate." Miguel felt a surge of protectiveness toward his daughter, but also concern about the situation she had created.
"Emma, Nija, maybe the colonel has a point. You're still very young, and there are other things you could focus on." "Papa, do you think I'm just a silly little girl too?"
Emma interrupted, her voice small and vulnerable in a way that broke her father's heart. Miguel reached across the table and took his daughter's hand.
"No, Emma. I think you're the smartest, strongest little girl I know.
But I also think that sometimes we have to be realistic about our goals." Emma pulled her hand away and returned to her books.
"Mama always said I could be anything I wanted to be if I worked hard enough."
"She never said I had to be realistic." Miguel sat in silence for a long moment, watching his daughter study those military manuals with the same intensity other children brought to their video games. Maria would have known what to say in this situation. She would have found a way to encourage Emma's dreams while also keeping her safe and grounded.
"What if I could find someone to teach you the basics?" Miguel said suddenly, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through.
"Not with real weapons, of course, but the fundamentals."
"Would that be something you'd be interested in?"
Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide with excitement.
"Really, Papa? You would do that for me?"
Miguel nodded slowly, already wondering how he was going to make good on this promise.
"I have some friends who might be willing to help.
But this would have to be our secret, at least for now. And you would have to promise me that you'll take this seriously, no playing around, complete focus on safety and proper technique." "I promise," Emma said solemnly.
"I promise I'll work harder than anyone has ever worked at anything."
As Miguel looked at his daughter's determined face, he couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation was a turning point for their family. Emma had always been strong-willed and ambitious, traits she had inherited from her mother, but this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something that would define the rest of her life. Over the next few weeks, Miguel quietly reached out to some trusted colleagues who might be willing to help with his daughter's unusual request. It wasn't easy. Most of his fellow soldiers were skeptical about teaching marksmanship to a child, especially a girl. But Miguel was persistent, and eventually he found someone willing to take a chance on Emma. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Martinez was a decorated marksman who had served multiple tours overseas and was known for her exceptional shooting skills. She was also a mother herself, and when Miguel explained the situation, she agreed to meet with Emma to assess her seriousness and potential. The meeting took place on a Saturday morning at a civilian shooting range about 30 minutes off base. Miguel had told Emma they were going on a special outing, but he hadn't revealed the details until they pulled into the parking lot.
"Is this really happening, Papa?"
Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she stared at the shooting range building.
"This is really happening," Miguel confirmed.
"But remember what we talked about: complete focus on safety, respect for Sergeant Martinez, and absolute dedication to learning properly."
Emma nodded eagerly and practically bounced out of the car.
Her excitement was infectious, and Miguel found himself smiling despite his lingering concerns about the whole endeavor. Staff Sergeant Martinez was waiting for them inside the range, and Emma was immediately impressed by the woman's confident demeanor and professional bearing. She was shorter than Emma had expected, but there was something about her presence that commanded respect. "So you're the young lady who wants to learn marksmanship," Martinez said, extending her hand to Emma. "Your father tells me you're quite serious about this." Emma shook the sergeant's hand firmly, remembering what her father had taught her about making good first impressions. "Yes, ma'am. I've been studying everything I can find about shooting techniques, and I watch the soldiers practice every morning." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Every morning? That's quite a commitment for someone your age. What is it about marksmanship that interests you so much?" Emma thought carefully about her answer. She had been asked this question several times now, and she was beginning to understand that her response mattered. Adults seemed to be looking for some specific reason that would justify her interest, some explanation that made sense to them. "I want to be excellent at something that matters," Emma said finally. "I want to develop a skill that could help protect people and serve my country. And I want to prove that being a girl doesn't mean I can't be just as good as anyone else." Martinez nodded approvingly. "Those are good reasons. But I need to be clear about something from the start. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. That means starting with safety protocols, proper handling techniques, and basic marksmanship principles. It means hours of practice with training weapons before you ever touch a real firearm. Are you prepared for that kind of commitment?" "Yes, ma'am," Emma said without hesitation. "I'm prepared for whatever it takes." And so began Emma Rodriguez's journey into the world of military marksmanship. What started as a child's ambitious dream, dismissed by a colonel who saw only a little girl with unrealistic fantasies, was about to become something much more significant. Emma didn't know it yet, but she was taking the first steps toward a destiny that would challenge every assumption about what was possible for someone her age and gender. As they walked toward the training area, Emma thought about Colonel Harrison's words and the condescending way he had smiled at her. Someday, she promised herself, she would have the chance to show him just how wrong he had been. Someday, she would prove that the little girl he had dismissed so casually was capable of achieving things that would surprise everyone who had ever underestimated her. The weight of the training rifle felt strange in Emma's small hands as Staff Sergeant Martinez showed her the proper grip for the third time that morning. They had been working for 2 hours, and Emma's arms were already trembling from holding the weapon in the correct position, but she refused to complain or ask for a break. "Remember, Emma, the rifle is an extension of yourself," Martinez explained patiently. "You need to become one with the weapon, to feel comfortable and natural holding it. Right now, you're fighting against it instead of working with it." Emma adjusted her grip according to the sergeant's instructions, trying to find that perfect balance between control and relaxation that seemed to come so naturally to the experienced soldier she had watched. The training rifle was heavier than she had expected, and her muscles weren't accustomed to maintaining the precise positions required for accurate shooting. "It's harder than it looks," Emma admitted, lowering the rifle and shaking out her aching arms. "Everything worthwhile is harder than it looks," Martinez replied with a slight smile. "The soldiers you've been watching have been training for years to make it seem effortless. What you're feeling right now, that struggle to maintain proper form, that's exactly what they felt when they were starting out." They were at the civilian range again, their third weekend session since Emma had begun her unofficial marksmanship training. Miguel had managed to arrange these lessons by calling in favors and agreeing to help Martinez with some paperwork in exchange for her time. It was an unconventional arrangement, but it was working better than anyone had expected. Emma had proven to be an exceptionally dedicated student. She arrived early to each session with a notebook full of questions and observations from her continued study of marksmanship techniques. She had even started doing exercises at home to build the specific muscle groups needed for steady shooting, following routines she had found in military training manuals. "Sergeant Martinez," Emma said as they took a brief water break, "I've been reading about breathing techniques for precision shooting. The book said that some snipers can slow their heart rate so much that they can fire between heartbeats. Is that really true?" Martinez nodded, impressed once again by the depth of Emma's research. "It's true. Advanced marksmen learn to control their breathing and heart rate to achieve maximum stability when taking difficult shots. But that's extremely advanced technique that takes years to master. Could you teach me how to do that?" Emma asked with the earnest enthusiasm that Martinez was beginning to recognize as her defining characteristic. "Eventually, perhaps," Martinez said. "But first, you need to master the fundamentals. You can't run before you learn to walk, and you can't achieve advanced marksmanship without perfecting the basics." Emma nodded eagerly and picked up her rifle again, determined to show improvement from their previous session. As she settled into her shooting stance, Martinez couldn't help but marvel at the little girl's focus and determination. In her 15 years of military service, she had trained many soldiers in marksmanship, but she had never encountered anyone with Emma's combination of intellectual curiosity and sheer willpower. What made Emma's progress even more remarkable was that she was doing all of this in secret. At school, she was just another third grader who got good grades and kept mostly to herself. Her teachers had no idea that their quiet student was spending her weekends learning military marksmanship from a decorated sergeant. Her classmates certainly didn't know that while they were watching cartoons, Emma was studying ballistics and practicing breathing exercises. The secrecy added an extra layer of pressure to Emma's training, but it also made her more determined than ever to succeed. She knew that if word got out about what she was doing, there would be questions and concerns from school officials, other parents, and possibly even military authorities. The last thing she wanted was for Colonel Harrison to find out about her training and put a stop to it. "Let's try some dry fire exercises," Martinez suggested, checking to make sure the rifle was completely unloaded. "I want you to practice your trigger squeeze without any ammunition. Focus on the smooth, steady pressure we've been working on." Emma nodded and raised the rifle to her shoulder, settling into the shooting position that was becoming more natural with each practice session. She had been working on her trigger control for weeks now, and she was beginning to understand why Martinez emphasized this skill above all others. "Good," Martinez said as she watched Emma's technique. "Your form is improving. I can see that you've been practicing at home like we discussed." Emma had indeed been practicing, much more than her father realized. Every night after completing her homework, she would spend at least an hour going through the exercises Martinez had taught her. She practiced her shooting stance in her bedroom, worked on breathing techniques while lying in bed, and even did finger exercises to strengthen her trigger control. As the morning progressed, Emma's confidence grew. She was hitting the target more consistently now, and her shots were grouping closer together than they had in previous sessions. Martinez had started her with very close targets, just 10 yards away, but even at this distance, Emma's improvement was noticeable. "I think you're ready to try a slightly more challenging distance," Martinez announced after Emma had fired a particularly good group of shots. "Let's move the target back to 15 yards and see how you do." Emma felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. Moving to a greater distance was a sign of progress, proof that her hard work was paying off. But it was also a new challenge, and she was afraid of disappointing Martinez after showing such improvement. As they reset the targets, Martinez noticed the mix of emotions playing across Emma's face. "Are you nervous about the longer distance?" "A little," Emma admitted. "What if I can't hit the target anymore?" "Then, we'll work on it until you can," Martinez said simply. "Emma, one thing you need to understand about marksmanship, about any skill, really, is that progress isn't always linear. You're going to have good days and bad days. The key is to learn from both and keep pushing forward." Emma nodded, absorbing this wisdom along with all the technical instruction she was receiving. She was beginning to understand that her marksmanship training was teaching her lessons that went far beyond shooting techniques. She was learning about patience, persistence, and the kind of mental discipline that would serve her well in any endeavor. When they moved to the 15-yard line, Emma's first few shots went wide of the target. The increased distance required subtle adjustments to her technique, and it took several attempts before she began to compensate properly. But Martinez was patient, offering gentle corrections and encouragement as Emma worked through the challenges. "Much better," Martinez said as Emma's shots began hitting the target again. "You're adapting well to the new distance. That's a sign of good foundational technique." By the end of their session, Emma was shooting reasonably well at 15 yards, though not with the same consistency she had achieved at 10. As they packed up their equipment, she felt both proud of her progress and eager to continue improving. "Sergeant Martinez," Emma said as they walked back to the car where Miguel was waiting, "how long do you think it will take me to become really good at this?" Martinez considered the question carefully. "Define really good," she said. "If you mean competent enough to hit targets consistently at reasonable distances, probably another 6 months of regular practice. If you mean good enough to compete with experienced adult marksmen, that could take years." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Years seemed like a very long time when you were 8 years old, but she had already committed herself to this path. "I want to be good enough to compete with anyone," she said finally.
I want to be so good that no one can ever say I don't belong. Martinez smiled at the determination in Emma's voice. Then, we'll keep working until you get there. But, remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint.
The key is consistent practice and constant learning.
During the drive home, Miguel asked Emma about her session, as he always did.
She had gotten into the habit of giving him detailed reports about what she had learned and how she was progressing. These conversations had become one of Miguel's favorite parts of their weekend routine.
Papa, do you think Colonel Harrison was right about anything he said to me? Emma asked suddenly, breaking her usual pattern of enthusiastic updates about her training. The question surprised Miguel.
Emma rarely mentioned the colonel anymore, and he had hoped she was moving past the hurt of that initial encounter.
What do you mean, Mija? Well, he said that marksmanship requires years of training and mental discipline that children don't possess, Emma said thoughtfully.
The training part is definitely true. Sergeant Martinez keeps telling me how long it takes to become really good.
And the mental discipline part is true too. This is much harder than I thought it would be.
Miguel glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, noting the serious expression on her face.
So you think the colonel was right? About those things, yes, Emma said.
But he was wrong about the most important part.
He thought that because I'm a little girl, I can't develop those things.
He thought I would give up or lose interest.
But I haven't, and I won't.
Miguel felt a surge of pride at his daughter's mature analysis of the situation.
No, you haven't given up. If anything, you've become more determined.
Sergeant Martinez says that some of the best marksmen she's ever known started training when they were young, Emma continued.
She says that children can actually learn some things faster than adults because they don't have as many bad habits to overcome.
This was news to Miguel, and it made him feel better about supporting Emma's unconventional hobby. He had worried that he was pushing his daughter into something inappropriate for her age, but Martinez's professional opinion carried significant weight.
That evening, Emma added her latest training notes to the journal she had been keeping since her first session with Martinez.
The journal contained detailed records of every exercise they had practiced, every piece of advice the sergeant had given her, and her own observations about her progress and areas for improvement. As she wrote, Emma thought about the other children in her class and how different her life was becoming from theirs. While they talked about television shows and video games, she found herself thinking about sight alignment and trigger control. While they complained about homework and chores, she was grateful for any free time she could use for marksmanship practice. Sometimes Emma wondered if she was missing out on a normal childhood, but then she would remember the feeling of hitting a target dead center or the satisfaction of mastering a new technique, and she knew she was exactly where she belonged. This wasn't just a hobby or a phase, it was her calling, her path to becoming something exceptional. The next week at school brought an unexpected challenge to Emma's carefully maintained double life. Her teacher, Mrs. Thompson, announced that the class would be doing a project about career aspirations, and each student would need to present about their dream job to the class.
Emma's heart sank as she listened to the assignment details. How could she possibly explain her true career aspirations without revealing her secret training?
She couldn't very well stand up in front of her classmates and announce that she wanted to be a military marksman. The questions and attention that would follow would certainly reach her father and, possibly even the base commander. As her classmates excitedly discussed their presentation plans, astronaut, veterinarian, professional athlete, movie star, Emma sat quietly, trying to figure out how to handle this situation. She couldn't lie about her dreams, but she couldn't tell the complete truth either.
That afternoon, she discussed the dilemma with her father over dinner. Miguel listened thoughtfully as Emma explained her concern about the presentation assignment. What if I just pick something else to talk about? Emma suggested.
I could say I want to be a teacher or a doctor or something normal like that.
Miguel shook his head.
Emma, your mother always taught us to be honest about who we are and what we want. I don't think she would want you to pretend to be someone you're not, even for a school project.
But what if people start asking questions? What if word gets back to Colonel Harrison? Miguel considered this for a moment. What if you focused on the service aspect of what you want to do?
You could talk about wanting to serve your country and protect people without getting into the specific details about marksmanship training.
Emma's face brightened as she considered this approach. I could talk about wanting to be in the military and help keep people safe. That's true, and it doesn't give away any secrets about my training.
Exactly, Miguel agreed.
You can be honest about your goals without revealing information that might cause problems.
Emma spent the next few days preparing her presentation, carefully crafting her message to be truthful while maintaining the privacy of her training. She researched different military occupations and talked about the importance of service and dedication to protecting others. When the day came for her presentation, she spoke with genuine passion about her desire to serve her country, and her classmates were impressed by her knowledge and conviction.
Mrs. Thompson was particularly struck by Emma's presentation.
After class, she asked Emma to stay behind for a moment. "That was a wonderful presentation, Emma," Mrs. Thompson said. "It's clear that you've put a lot of thought into your future career goals.
Have you had a chance to talk to any military personnel about what their work is really like?"
Emma chose her words carefully.
"Yes, ma'am.
My father is in the military, and I've learned a lot from him and from other soldiers I've met on the base where we live."
"Well, it shows," Mrs. Thompson said with a smile.
"Your understanding of military service seems much more mature than what I would expect from most students your age. You should be proud of the research you've done."
Emma felt a warm glow of satisfaction as she left the classroom.
She had managed to be honest about her aspirations while protecting the secret of her training. More importantly, she had articulated her goals in a way that earned respect from an adult who didn't know about her unusual circumstances. That weekend's training session with Martinez brought new challenges and new progress. The sergeant had decided it was time to introduce Emma to different shooting positions: prone, sitting, and kneeling, in addition to the standing position they had been practicing. Real-world marksmanship isn't just about standing at a shooting line and firing at stationary targets, Martinez explained as they set up for the lesson. You need to be able to shoot accurately from any position, under various conditions.
Emma threw herself into learning these new positions with her characteristic determination.
The prone position was particularly challenging for her small frame, requiring her to support the weight of the rifle while lying flat on the ground. But she persevered, adjusting her technique based on Martinez's feedback and gradually improving her accuracy from each new position.
As the weeks passed, Emma's skills continued to develop at an impressive pace.
Martinez began introducing more advanced concepts: wind compensation, range estimation, and different types of ammunition.
Emma absorbed everything eagerly, asking thoughtful questions and practicing diligently between sessions.
"You know, Emma," Martinez said during one of their sessions, "I've been thinking about your long-term development as a marksman. If you're serious about continuing this training, there are competitions you could eventually participate in."
Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really? What kind of competitions?"
"There are junior shooting sports programs, civilian marksmanship competitions, and, eventually, if you pursue a military career, various military shooting competitions. Some of the best marksmen in the country got their start in these programs."
The idea of competing against other shooters thrilled Emma.
It would be a chance to test her skills against others and to prove that her age and gender didn't define her capabilities. But it also raised questions about how to manage her secret training if she wanted to participate in public competitions.
"Would I need permission from my father to compete?" Emma asked.
"Absolutely," Martinez replied. "And, honestly, Emma, I think it might be time to consider being more open about your training.
You've proven your commitment and shown real talent. Keeping this a secret much longer might actually hold back your development." Emma nodded thoughtfully.
She had been thinking the same thing lately. The secrecy that had protected her training in the beginning was becoming a limitation. If she wanted to reach the next level of marksmanship, she would need access to better facilities, more advanced instruction, and opportunities to compete against other shooters. That evening, Emma broached the subject with her father.
"Papa, Sergeant Martinez thinks I should consider entering some shooting competitions. But she says that means we can't keep my training secret anymore." Miguel had been expecting this conversation for weeks.
He had watched his daughter's skills develop and had seen how seriously she took her training. He had also noticed that the secrecy was beginning to weigh on Emma, making her feel like she was living a double life. "What do you think about that, Mija?" he asked. "Are you ready for people to know about what you've been doing?"
Emma was quiet for a long moment.
"I'm scared," she admitted finally.
"What if Colonel Harrison tries to stop me? What if other people think it's weird or wrong for a girl my age to be interested in marksmanship?"
Miguel reached over and took his daughter's hand. "Emma, you've worked too hard and come too far to let other people's opinions stop you now. If Colonel Harrison or anyone else has a problem with what you're doing, we'll deal with it. But, you can't let fear hold you back from pursuing your dreams. Emma looked into her father's eyes and saw the same determination that had driven her.